fundamental of capital growth is your long-term capital growth. And I know it sounds intuitive and also a bit funny saying it that way, but the reason for this is because a lot of people say, past performance doesn't dictate future performance, and basically because of this, because of that, because of something else is a reason why one market goes up, down, or sideways, right? But really, how can you get to an actual, should I say, conclusion if you haven't done any research on a suburb itself? And really, if you want to quantify something or invest in something, the only way to quantify it really and qualify it as well is to look at what's happened in the past, because you're not Marty McFly with a time machine. So it's not as if you know what's going to happen in the future without knowing what happens in the past. So the people who say that are just full of rubbish, really. So, if you think even of value investing, Warren Buffett's philosophy, even his mentor, Benjamin Graham, they always talk about when you're looking to invest in a company, for example, they want a long-term existence or a long-term track record of good performance, but bad performance recently. So you're basically buying a, blue chip asset at a very cheap price. That's what they try to do. So really what they're saying there is you want something that has long-term good capital growth or long-term good performance that you're buying for a, should I say, underpriced value. So that's why this is an important area. Now, what I'm going to get into with this is a suburb called Yarraville in Melbourne. Now, everyone knows it's one of my favorite suburbs. I target this one regularly. I don't know many better suburbs in the country. For me, it's probably a top 10 in the country for sure. But what I've done here is I've just brought out a report here. So it's just your Aussie Home Loans 25-year report. And the reason I brought this out is because it was between 93 and 2018. So it's before a 0.1% interest rate, by which everyone thinks they're an expert, just getting it right in the COVID period. But what I've done here is I've actually highlighted just so Melbourne is the best performing capital growth city of Australia, to give you an idea. And this is just the top 20. And you'll see just in the highlights 2, 12, 13, and 2, 12, 13, and then I think it's 16 as well there. They're all in the Maribyrnong Council region there. And if you look at also number 15, that's Spotswood, which actually neighbours Yarraville. If you were to go to the top 100 as well, you'd have West Footscray and Footscray in here as well. So that's multiple. That's like 6 or 7 of them literally within the space of the top 100 suburbs in the country in that period. And that report as well, not all of it was exactly correct, but most of it was. But what I'm showing here is you can see an eventuation to certain areas. So this is the inner west of Melbourne. So, and then Yarraville's, it's literally smack bang in the middle of all these best suburbs. So, you've literally got like Seddon, which neighbours it. You've got also West Footscray, which also neighbours it to the north, and Footscray to the north. Then you've also got Kingsville, which also neighbours it too, and then Spotswood just to the south. So every suburb around it is literally in the top 100 suburbs of the country, and Yarraville smack bang in the middle of it. So if you want an eventuation as to where it's done very well, find out areas that are done well and try to pick the suburbs that are basically in the middle of it, and that is Yarraville. So that's the first fundamental. What is the long-term capital growth of the market? Let's get into the second key fundamental of capital growth, and that is consistently low supply. So obviously everyone would know supply and demand is your most key part of this. I'd argue supply is probably even a little bit more important than demand, because there's certain areas that just consistently have no supply. So even in bad markets, not really much happens to them. That's the reason. With supply as well, I could also say too that, what I'm talking about here is consistently low supply at the moment, consistently low supply of the past, and I also mean consistently low supply in the future. So, that basically eliminates all new estates because they're just rubbish. It eliminates all units because they're also rubbish in terms of supply in that manner. And what low supply always does is, especially if you got the right demand, it naturally will have to push prices up, because prices are more so, capital growth is more so a case of supply and demand more than anything. Now, you'll get idiots that say, no, that's not the case and that kind of thing. But if you've got 10 multi-millionaires bidding for a house that only has, $1 million price point, you're naturally going to know that that's going to go up in value. Now, the key part of supply is obviously who's buying it, but I will get into that in another point later. But a really good example of consistently low supply is just somewhere like Clovelly in Sydney. So Look, in this example here, all I've basically done is gone on realestate.com.au, just searched up houses for sale, and even in that actual highlighted white section, that there's nothing for sale there, and you can see there's literally 3 houses for sale in a whole suburb. So this is a good example of one. I mean, I've done the example of Clovelly a couple of months ago as well, and I think at that time there was only 4 or 5 houses for sale at the time. So this is a good example of a suburb where there's just never anything available for sale. And I mean, longer term, this is really good for capital growth, because there's no point where you see much on the market, people hold them for a long time, especially good ones, and that just pushes prices up like crazy because a lot of people want to live there. So what I'll do then is I'll go into point number 3 for capital growth, and that is demand from a wealthy demographic. So where I was saying consistently low supply is a little bit more important is because if it's in the right area, you constantly have demand from a wealthy income demographic. So just in this photo here, you can see this is Canterbury in Melbourne. It's a really good example somewhere where you have very wealthy people often wanting to buy, often wealthy families. No one really sells the right homes there. Like they do come up, like a couple a year will come up, but to get that for the right price is like, I mean, it's like finding Bigfoot. It's like almost impossible to give you an idea. So that's just something to consider. I mean, for looking in a suburb with a wealthy income demographic that also has low supply. But like, what's really key about a wealthy income demographic is that these are the sorts of people that can continue to push prices up. And these are also the people that generally do not have to sell in downtimes. They generally just hold, they're fine, and nothing really goes wrong. So this is just an example here. You'll just see Point Piper is basically Australia's most expensive suburb. 5 houses in the whole year changed hands. So 5 houses in the whole year in Point Piper actually sold. 2 are above 60 million. And that's pretty common in Point Piper. That'll increase year after year after year. But the thing about these suburbs as well that have a wealthy income demographic looking at them, they generally don't have many homes to sell, first of all. But second of all, what happens here is people don't understand how they kind of work, because they'll think that it's crushed by 20 or 30% when the market's down. But what's happened is the vast majority of the people just haven't listed their properties, and especially the top end of these markets. So, I mean, Point Piper, you have homes selling from anything between about 10 million right up to 200 or more, right? So the very most expensive ones, they will only sell their homes when, I kid you not, it is somewhere near the very peak of the market, so they can get absolute top dollar for it, because they can pretty much just pick whenever they want to sell their home. So that's just another thing about wealthy income demographic looking for a suburb. So that's really important. That's point number 3. Point number 4, access to high-paying jobs. Now, this is important because access to high-paying jobs generally brings a higher income demographic, and it generally brings more demand from the right people. That's the reason it's really important. You can see here just on the overhead here, this is just Kelvin Grove in Brisbane. So it's an inner suburb of Brisbane, right next to the hospital precinct and the university precinct as well. It's actually within the university precinct, to be honest. But anyway, that's a good example of somewhere that it has high-paying jobs. The reason it's really important is because generally wealthier people with higher paying jobs, they don't like commuting to work. It's just something they don't do, because if you don't have to, why would you? So, I mean, the thing about this is, I mean, most of the better suburbs that have very good jobs that are close by generally have a longer hold period, because people generally stay longer. And not only that too, the jobs are good. Everything just works well there. Look, a good example, I'm actually going to go west for this because I've done a lot of the eastern seaboard of this, is a suburb called Duncraig in Perth. So if you just look at this here, this is just basically your major job hubs in Perth. You'll see here Osborne Park and Joondalup. Duncraig's sort of probably about I'd say it's probably about 30% of the way north of Osborne Park, sort of towards the coast a little bit. That's where Duncraig is. I probably should have circled it, but I didn't in this example. So Duncraig's obviously close to Osborne Park, not far from Joondalup either, close to Nedlands, close to the CBD. It's close to all the good jobs in the lifestyle area. So that's a good example as to what a suburb that would do very well. People that would live in Duncraig don't generally have to go very far to work, and if at most probably half an hour, and that would probably be even in bad traffic. I mean, so Like that's a good example of somewhere where you have good proximity to high paying jobs. That in Duncraig in Perth. That's point number 4. Point number 5, lifestyle triangle. So what's your lifestyle triangle? The distance it takes you to go to work, to school, and lifestyle areas and back home. And generally, depending on the city, you want that to be anywhere from about 15 minutes to about half an hour. Look, Sydney, obviously, and Melbourne, half an hour is pretty good. If you're looking at a regional location, like Newcastle, for example, it's probably 15 to 20 minutes. Geelong's probably an absolute maximum of 15 minutes because it's a much smaller city, that's all. But this is really important because people, if they have the ability to, again, it's like with high paying jobs, they don't like commuting to areas if they don't have to. So if you're wealthy and you have the money, which are the people you want to buy in your suburb, you basically want to just have everything easy for you. You don't want to have to do anything overly hard. You really just want to live your life in an easy way where you don't have to commute too far. You're not wasting time stuck in traffic. People just don't like that. So that's really important it's for the people actually buying in the longevity of the suburb. And a good example of that, I'm going to go to a different city again just to mix it up a little bit, is the Junction in Newcastle. So you sort of see to just sort of the bottom center here, just highlighted kind of in the checkered kind of crossing red and white there. That's where the Junction is. So to just describe to you why it's good, you've got basically Newcastle High very close by. You've got Newcastle Grammar not overly far from there. You've got a lot of primary schools that are really close there too. You've got Merriweather, Susan Gilmore Beach, Newcastle CBD, all close there. So basically everything you'd want is close by. All the parks as well. Newcastle Racecourse, not far from the stadium either. I mean, everything's close by to the Junction. So that's a good example of a good lifestyle location where people want to live longer term. In Newcastle, yes, it's more expensive, but it's expensive for a reason. People don't like selling in good suburbs. It's just how the market works. It's a really good area to buy in. And yeah, longer term, this is where it works. The Junction's a part of the Golden Triangle of Newcastle. It's a property term that's known for being basically where some of the most expensive and best capital growth properties are in the whole city. So the Junction is one of the key suburbs to that, to give you an idea. So that's point number 5, your lifestyle triangle. Let's get into point number 6, and that is school zones. Now, it is a very important point, don't get me wrong, definitely an important point, but what I'd say here is don't get fooled too much by just buying because of a certain, let's say just a random school zone. It really needs to be a particular school zone. So, I mean, there's been cases plenty of times, for example, where one property that is next to another, the one that's in the school zone and another that isn't, has sold for up to 20 to 30% more. Now, a good example of that in Brisbane, this is just in Spring Hill here. And I'm not going to say Spring Hill because Spring Hill's home to basically Brisbane Grammar and Brisbane Girls Grammar. But a good example in Brisbane is actually East Brisbane. There's some parts of it, and Wollongabba, some parts are in the east, in the Brisbane State High School zone, which is very well known in Brisbane, and others aren't. And you do get property selling for significantly differently in those sorts of suburbs. So that's a good example. But the best example I want to give you is probably in Melbourne, and it's the McKinnon Secondary College example. So, look, McKinnon Secondary College is pretty much one of your best known public high schools. Look, private high schools are very good for capital growth, but I'm giving you this one because I've seen people fight over, families fight over the same stock just to get in this market to send their kids to McKinnon Secondary College multiple times. I've seen properties sell for, $300,000-400,000 above market just to get in this college area before. McKinnon itself, it's only really zoned in McKinnon, Ormond, and some parts of Bentley. That's kind of where the zone is for it. It's been extended a little bit in recency, but not very much. But this suburb is extremely tightly held. School zones that are good generally make the suburb very tightly held, and especially if it's also a prestigious private school and it's close by. Those pockets are also very tightly held, and you also have a wealthy income demographic. So if you have something like McKinnon, because it's close to both, good private schools and a very good public school, you've got both private and public people fighting over the same stuff, and it becomes an absolute frenzy in the market. So, these suburbs, I mean, they're very tightly held. You often don't have many properties on the market, not the right ones either, that people want to live in. So that's just something to consider. McKinnon Secondary College, school zones are very important. Not all school zones, but ones particularly like this are very important. You can have 20, 30% extra sale price just for being in the school zone. So point number 6 is school zones. Let's get into point number 7, and that's facilities/hospitals. So the reason I've got facilities/hospitals is because facilities are really important, but hospitals in particular are a very good thing for capital growth. Now, what are facilities? It's basically lifestyle facilities. It might be like parks, it might be like health clinics, it might be physiotherapists, it could be even mind training and stuff like that, anything like that. Even I guess you could probably say as well, facilities would include transport too. That's also pretty important. That is definitely a facility. But I want to get into particularly transport and hospitals, because transport's important because it helps the lifestyle triangle a lot. If you know, you might have a metro line or a very fast train from where you are, it might be a major station, a major bus route. It might get you actually to a location faster than another location that's even closer by. So that helps. Hospitals, the reason they're very, very good for capital growth is because hospitals themselves create capital growth because you've got a government-backed industry, which is healthcare. That's both publicly and privately backed, because obviously you've got private insurers and private hospitals as well that are important. And people that work in hospitals, that's a very stable job, and it's also a lot of high-paying people. So you've obviously got, you know, doctors, dentists, anaesthetists, surgeons. All of these people are paid quite good sums of money, and these guys generally don't like living very far away from where they work, and that's because they could be, called into, let's say, shift, or it could be even surgery for multiple hours, and they do a lot of overtime. So, these kinds of people these are the people that you want in the area, and they tend to be quite, I'd say, good tenants as well. Even if let's say you buy an investment in that location, doctors is a perfect tenant. Someone who is a high income owner, is barely home, working all the time, and just basically sleeps in the home. That's pretty much the guy you want in your house. So, that's something with facilities and hospitals. And look, the best example I can give anyone of this is probably in Brisbane, because it's the most centralised, I'd say, healthcare and probably, let's say, transport area, and that is a suburb called Hurston. So Hurston's about 2.5 to 3 k's north of Brisbane CBD, and it's basically a suburb of Queensland Health. This is what it kind of looks like. Pretty much half the suburb is like Queensland Health, to give you an idea. Now, there's buses everywhere and transport everywhere here just to get to the CBD and anywhere you need to go. It's very easy. But basically everything you would need in terms of healthcare is in Hurston, every single bit of it, because the whole Queensland Health Precinct is there. The university is very close to there as well. So even if you needed to get, should I say, specialists, maybe, I don't know, molecular research done on you, it would be literally a 2-minute drive to get that over to a uni to get it studied on or something like that. So Hurston's probably the best example of that. It's a suburb that I really like targeting. It's quite cheap as well, mind you. Well located too, but that's a good example of facilities and hospitals helping a suburb do very well and will longer term. Hurston in Brisbane. That's number 7. Number 8, personal income levels. Now, it's something that probably people overlook here because, what the reason this is important, it's a couple of things, and it's because it's not all suburbs, but certain ones over time, and you'll see this happen particularly in Sydney and Melbourne a lot, and also with the Brisbane Olympics coming up too. You'll get higher density in certain suburbs, right? It's just the way it works. Now, I've just got an overhead here of Cremorne in Melbourne in the backdrop of the MCG. It's basically the MCG suburb. But the reason I got that there is because it's one of the highest personal income levels in all of Melbourne. Why this is important is because if you ever get higher density and also for rental purposes, so high density, number 1, the income still stays quite high, so prices still stay quite elevated. And number 2, which is more important when people don't think about this, it's the actual rental yield of a suburb. People can only afford what they can actually earn. It's only a certain percentage. So suburbs that have higher personal income levels generally continue to rent higher and higher and higher, even if it's like a two-better detached house, because people can afford it. That's the key thing. Now, these are pretty much all in all in, I mean, inner city locations, generally close to really high paying jobs. So it does go along with a lot of the other points I was talking about, but it's really important for that reason as well. But look, probably the best example I can give someone is probably Paddington in Sydney in New South Wales. So you'll see here, it goes basically personal, family, then household income. But look, if you just look at personal income there, you'll see $16.98 per week compared to the state average at $18.13 a week. So it's more than double the state average, and New South Wales is one of the higher earning states in Australia. So that's really good then. Like, the reason I'll show you Paddington is it'd be similar to Cremorne is you got a lot of smaller cottages and a lot of, working professionals, childless couples that live here. So you see just there 4,686, that's family income. So that's way more than double, than the state average there. And this is what I mean by personal income levels being very high. So if you have an abnormal dwelling in Paddington or an abnormal dwelling in a high personal income level suburb, what you'll see is the actual amount of income people live in those actual family houses is astronomical. So that is actually one of the highest in the country for family income. It's one of the highest, yes, personal as well, but it's not one of the highest household incomes. And the reason it's not one of the highest household is because you have a lot of people here that just live in the two-bedder cottages, so it's only two incomes. That's the reason it's not that. And you even have a lot of small one-bedroom dwellings as well. So that's the reason the household isn't as high. So it's another thing just to consider when you're looking at suburbs personal income levels, because it's overlooked a lot, and it's really important for longer term rental appreciation as well. So that's point number 8, personal income levels. Getting to the closing stage of this, point number 9 is planning restrictions. So what do I mean by planning restrictions? It's the objections and the legislation basically around trying to get anything done in terms of development in a suburb. So the photo here is just Highgate Hill. It's a good example of one that is on the cusp of basically the CBD, cusp of South Melbourne, cusp of Wollongabba, South Brisbane, cusp of Wollongabba. And Highgate Hill is predominantly a detached dwelling, lower density suburb, but it's surrounded by higher density. Now, what this does is it makes the stock very scarce. So if you have scarce stock and a lot of demand for it, you generally have very high prices and continually increase prices. So Highgate Hill is a good example of that, but even a better example of that is St Kilda in Melbourne. So St Kilda it's very interesting because I mean, you got obviously it's one of the older suburbs of Melbourne. I mean, it's very well known, obviously, for Luna Park. It's well known for its beachfront area. It's well known for its baths. I mean, there's a few little different precincts where, I'd say people go for coffee, go to restaurants. There's a few different parts. It's a really well-known suburb, really good capital growth there. But it's probably one of the most difficult suburbs in the whole country to develop in because there's just ridiculous planning restrictions around there. You have every group in the world not wanting a single thing to change there. And here's just an example of it. Planning protects St Kilda Road and the Shrine. New planning controls around St Kilda Road and the Shrine of Remembrance will protect and enhance picturesque and historic part of the inner city. So that's a good example of it. And the funny thing about somewhere like St Kilda is, and a lot of these actual locations is, you got the most alternate kind of like lifestyle people that live here, and they always want huge numbers of people coming in. They want increased density. They want huge immigration numbers and all that kind of thing. Often it's very common for these kind of people to do it. However, what generally happens is that they'll say, oh yeah, we want this, but when it comes to their suburb, they're the biggest objectors you will ever see in these kind of areas because they just do not want a single thing to happen in their suburb. They want it to stay the same, but they want higher density in every other location. So basically, if you can think of an area where people are pro a lot of this and own high income, and are hypocrites, it's probably a very easy way to know where has planning restrictions, because nearly all of those areas do. Sydney CBD is no different. Paddington, Darlinghurst, Glebe, Balmain, inner parts of Brisbane are no different as well. So that's an easy way to do it if you want a quick, easy way. But planning restrictions are, as I said, important because it limits the amount of stock that you have and it makes the land even more finite. That's the reason. So it makes stock levels tighter and it puts high income demographic people living there too, because most of them generally don't want to live amongst skyscrapers and they want to live on their own little lots in generally lower density places. So important for that. That's point number 9, planning restrictions. Let's get into the final one, and number 10, and that's infrastructure. Now, look, it's not my favorite kind of point to discuss, but the reason I put this in there, because I guess it's still important. It's probably less than 2% important in my opinion, but it is important for very few suburbs, so I'm going to put it in there. But the infrastructure I'm really talking about, it's not just any infrastructure. Like you get people who say like, oh, McDonald's is going here, for example, or, you know, there's a new estate going here. Like who really gives a shit about that infrastructure? It doesn't mean anything. Now, the infrastructure I'm really talking about is key infrastructure. It's especially key job hubs, major job hubs, especially major transport networks going into key areas where there are good jobs. That's another key thing. And especially if it's already in a good location, that makes it even better if it's a very good lifestyle location. Those are probably the 3 most key things. But if it's particularly around anything to do with jobs, longer term job security and should I say income in an area, because that improves the whole demographics of the area. So that's what I'm more talking about, right? Now, this image here is just Wickham. So that's a good example somewhere in a Newcastle that's done very well, but I'm going to get into a different one that will be one in the future to watch due to infrastructure, and that suburb is Canwall in the Central Coast. So this is just basically Central Coast Regional Plan. You can find it online if you really want to. And Canwall really, what it's kind of done is you've got kind of like you made those sort of circles with the smaller circles around them that are coloured in sort of that purpley colour. Those are your major sort of centres of the region. Your kind of one that's just a bit smaller, the one near Warnervale there, that's basically one that's a kind of like township. It's a smaller centre, should I say. Now, you can't quite see it here, but a little bit further north there as well, sort of just past Lake Haven as well. There's also another major one. So Canwall really, it's right in between sort of minor and major ones. Now, to give you an idea, basically Wyong Tuggerah are your major stations of the Central Coast, are a part of the transport-orientated plan as well, which take you straight to all the major jobs. Here, you're also very close to Nora Head. You're not overly far from the entrance either, which are lifestyle locations as well. And the thing about Canwall is it's one of the suburbs on the Central Coast that was built like 25 plus to 30 years ago or so, right? So a lot of the people there have either very low LVRs or own their homes completely outright. It's a unique kind of suburb of the Central Coast, and it's pretty much all built. So it's exceptionally located. It's very well, should I say, built in terms of long-term residents, and it's right near all these major sort of future infrastructure projects and the key ones as well. So as I said again, lifestyle is one. That's probably the 3rd most important, mind you. Second there is probably transport, and then especially if it goes to point number 1, which is job centres, and the major ones in the Central Coast particularly will be Tuggerah and Wyong. That area is going to be full of jobs. So this is right next to it. It's about a 10-minute to 15-minute drive away. It's very, very close. So Canwall is a good example of a suburb like that. So just to recap, that's point number 10. Just to go back to the start, we've got basically a few different points. So first is long-term capital growth. Second, consistently low supply. 3rd, demand from a wealthy income demographic. 4th, access to high-paying jobs. 5th is your lifestyle triangle. 6th, school zones. 7th, facilities such as transport, in particular hospitals. That was number 7. Number 8 is personal income levels. 9 is planning restrictions. And finally, as I said, 10 is infrastructure.